You think being alone is the ultimate price to pay, but have you calculated the cost of staying? We are taught to fear an empty room, the single place setting, the quiet evening with no one to answer to, the particular silence of a life that belongs entirely to you. These things are presented to us as losses, as evidence of failure, as the thing that happens when you could not make it work, could not hold it together, could not find a way to keep the peace. But there is another cost that nobody talks about with the same urgency, the slow, silent erosion of your soul that happens in a crowded, dishonest life. The particular exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer exists for the sake of a stability that stopped being real some time ago. I finally stopped trading my integrity for the hollow safety of a polite facade, and what I found on the other side was not the loss everyone warned me about. It was the beginning of something I had not had in years. The sound of my own thoughts, uninterrupted. The weight of the polished veneer. There is a specific kind of tiredness that belongs to people who have been performing for a long time. Not the tiredness of hard work, which leaves a clean residue of satisfaction. This is the tiredness of sustained pretense, the exhaustion of being careful, of monitoring your expressions, of choosing words that will land without complication, of being the version of yourself that keeps the atmosphere manageable, because you have learned over years that the alternatives are worse. You have been good at this. You may not even recognize it as performance anymore, because it has become so fluent, so automatic, so much the texture of daily life that it simply feels like who you are. But if you sit quietly long enough, you can find the seam. The moment in a conversation where you felt one thing and said another. The opinion you swallowed before it reached your mouth. The need you dressed up as something more acceptable or abandoned entirely because the effort of fighting for it was more expensive than the thing itself. The weight of the polished veneer is not always dramatic. It rarely announces itself as suffering. It arrives in the chronic, low-grade fatigue of a life that is slightly, persistently off, the gap between what is actually true and what you present as true. That gap costs energy every single day, energy you do not have available for the things that might actually feed you because it is being spent on maintenance, on the upkeep of a surface. The high interest rate of staying every year. You remain in an arrangement that has reached its honest conclusion. The interest compounds. Not in money, in the invisible currencies that actually determine the quality of a life. You pay in creative energy first. The parts of you that generate new ideas, new connections, new ways of seeing, these require a certain quality of internal spaciousness. They need room to move, room to explore, room to be uncertain without that uncertainty immediately being managed or minimized. In a relationship built on a foundation of avoided conversations, that spaciousness contracts. The creative self learns to stay small because small is safer. You pay in physical presence second. Chronic stress has a texture, a particular quality of held tension that lives in the body. The shoulders that never quite relax, the sleep that never quite restores, the immune system that runs slightly depleted, as if some part of the body is permanently on guard. You may have stopped noticing it because it has been there so long, but the body keeps the account with perfect accuracy, and it is charging you interest every night. And you pay in time the most irreversible of the currencies. The years spent in an arrangement you already knew was wrong are years you do not recover. This is not said to induce guilt. Guilt is not useful here. It is said because time has weight, and the weight of postponed honesty is something worth understanding clearly before you make the next decision about how long to stay. The violent act of choosing yourself. When you finally decide to stop performing, when you allow the surface to come apart, When you step out of the arrangement and into a life that is honest, the world will tell you that you are being selfish. It will tell you this in many different ways. It will wear the face of concern, of worry for you, of genuine love that does not want to see you make a mistake. It will wear the face of social expectation, of the assumption that a certain kind of life is the responsible one, the mature one, the one that a person of your age and your background and your obligations ought to be choosing. And sometimes it will wear the face of someone who is simply frightened by what your honesty implies about their own arrangements, their own accommodations, their own polished surfaces. You do not have to absorb any of this as truth. The good on paper myth is one of the most powerful forces keeping women in arrangements that have expired. Good on paper means from the outside it looks fine, the house is nice, the relationship appears stable, the surface is polished. Good on paper has nothing to do with what is actually true inside the arrangement, with whether you feel seen, whether you feel alive, whether the person you are in that relationship is the person you recognize as yourself. Dismantling a life that is good on paper is not a violent act, even though it will sometimes be received as one. It is an act of accuracy. It is the correction of a mismatch between appearance and reality. It is, in the most literal sense, the truth. The architecture of a quiet room, the empty room that everyone warned you about, is not what they told you it would be. It is not the room of lack. It is the room of no longer having to account for yourself to someone who stopped being curious about you. It is the room where you can think a thought from beginning to end without it being interrupted or redirected, where you can sit with an emotion without managing someone else's response to it. Where the morning belongs to you entirely, the coffee at the temperature you want it, the silence or the music or the radio at the volume that suits you, the pace of the day shaped by nothing except what you actually need. Women who have made this transition describe a specific early experience that surprises them. The first time they rearranged the furniture without consulting anyone. The first time they ate what they wanted for dinner without negotiating. The first time they stayed up until 2 a.m. reading because they wanted to, and the only person affected was them. These are small things, but they are not nothing. They are the first evidence of a life that is genuinely yours. Solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the feeling of being alone in a room full of people, the particular isolation of being present and invisible at the same time. What becomes available in genuine solitude is something quite different. The return of your own company, the discovery that you are, in fact, someone worth spending time with, that your thoughts are interesting, that your preferences are real, that the self that has been compressed and accommodated and performed around for years is still there and is, if you give it a little space, quietly delightful. The return on genuine peace. Here is what nobody mentions when they warn you about the empty room, the clarity. When you are no longer managing someone else's perception of your happiness, your mind stops running the background process that consumed so much of it. The constant low-level monitoring. Are they all right? What do they need? What will this cost? How do I present this so it lands without damage, goes quiet? And what is revealed underneath it, once the noise clears, is the actual signal, what you think, what you want, what matters to you. This clarity is not comfortable at first. It can feel disorienting, even frightening, to hear your own voice so clearly after years of it being crowded out. Some of what it tells you, you will not be ready for. Some of it will require you to grieve things you have been too busy to grieve. But it is honest. And honesty, even when it is painful, is always less expensive than its alternative. The initial sting of solitude, the adjustment period, the learning to live inside a life that is entirely your own is real. Do not let anyone tell you it is not, but it is temporary. It is the price of transition, not the permanent condition of a life lived honestly. And on the other side of it is something that women who have arrived there describe with a consistency that is worth trusting, a peace that is not performance, a quietness that is not emptiness, a sense of oneself that does not depend on anyone else's presence to remain stable. You spent years learning to be what a shared life required. The life that is genuinely yours will ask something different of you, simply to be what you actually are. And that, after everything, turns out to be enough. If this names something you have been afraid to say out loud, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not yet on this porch, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of truth we tell each other here. I am Patricia, and I will see you next week.